Hey, it's Writers Row, where we talk about the writing community on Twitter. We talk about the business and creative side of writing. I am DC Wright-Hammer, one of your hosts as usual, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host.
David Gane, who is a writer as well and a co-writer. I always dump my writing partner, but I have a writing partner, but I do write. I'm going to be writing on my own, so I'm going to start embracing just being a writer. So I'm gonna do a bit of both in the near future. So yes, that's me. That's what I
So,
do. What are we
uh,
talking about, DC, on this show?
we are going to dig into the concept of what can make a good book go bad. And so I was thinking about some of the books I've read and even some of the stories or media that I've watched where things are going okay at the very least, or possibly even good, and then some story decisions made it go south
But this
pretty
is not
quick.
you going to be rehashing why you dislike Game of Thrones, right?
Um, well, that would have we could have a ton of examples with that.
I know.
But mostly just let's focus on books for the most part. And
Okay.
I also want to rule out like editing and things like that. Like we get that if a book is poorly edited, that is going to ruin the experience, but then that's more on the author editor, not on the story itself. So we'll just focus on the story. So I understand that you have some very strong opinions
You're
on
like, I hope so.
or otherwise this show is going to go downhill fast, kind of like the premise. Oh, that would be such a meta experience for everyone. um,
Bad
they had
show
high hopes
decisions.
going in and we just ordered them right away. So David, what do you
Yeah.
think can ruin a good book?
Actually, I want to start with yours because you had one that we just before we started the show that I really, really liked. Um, and it's such a like a right to the worst case scenario.
Yeah, so I won't give away the specific book, but I was reading one by a more famous author, and I had read several from this author, and I was very excited about this one. And I got about 60% of the way through, and it was already kind of losing me a little bit,
Yeah.
but it had some redeeming factors.
Can I
The
ask why it was losing you to begin with before you get to the big
the
thing?
premise was a little iffy, like it was
Okay.
kind of again without spoiling the book itself. The premise itself was
A little far-fetched?
interesting. It was interesting, but yeah, it was tough to suspend disbelief as much as the premise wanted me to. It was science fiction.
I was going to
It
say,
was
let's
more,
at least
it
kind of
was like,
hint towards the genre.
yeah, speculative science fiction. So it took place in relative modern day, but it just took it to that extra degree. And so I'm like, all right, if you can just get me through this book, then I can at least say maybe it was worth it. And about 60% of the way through, the main character just gets offed in this random encounter. Just the main character, the person we've been following the whole time. And the author went to great lengths to make us care about the main character. Like there are some familial ties to the plot and things like that, and that's driving it forward. And it all came screeching to a halt when that happened. It was almost like a punch in the gut. I'm like, really? All that setup and
Was there a reason for it though, do you think?
so I thought about it more and more, and I can't really figure it out. I mean, like George R. R. Martin does that. He'll kill main characters, and that is, I think there's a way to do that where it plays a bigger portion, a bigger role in the story itself. It allows other characters to shine that maybe you've been building up. It allows the story to take a complete turn. Maybe you wanted to abandon that portion of it and the main character had to go with it. In my mind, there has to be some kind of baton that hands off to either another character or set of characters or something, or just takes the story in a completely different direction. And I felt like it was realistic. The situation that occurred, anyone could have died. The main character did die, but I felt like that just derailed what little the book had. So now I can't suspend disbelief and I can't like the character that I liked so much. I'm left with supporting characters that can't quite do the job.
So were there consequences of killing off the character that helped drive the story? I'm
I
always
don't.
kind of curious, like, is there something else that came about because of it, though? Right?
So, yeah, I mean, it left characters that didn't seem as capable to finish out the story. So it did give maybe a little bit more feeling of lonely, like the characters are dying off and the main character is now dead. And so the handful of people who are left are just, oh, now we can't even rely on the main character for doing what he used to do. And so maybe it was supposed to like scare us a little more, make it a little more intense, make it a little more emotional. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't think it was done well. I think you can kill off main characters. I'm not saying don't
Oh,
do
yeah.
it. I'm saying have a great plan around it to foster the rest of the story forward rather than, hey, I think I could just kill this guy off and get away with it. And that's kind of how it felt in this particular book.
See, and I think that's the big thing that we're going to kind of keep coming across as we talk about these is that idea that everything is going to be a choice that these authors have, right? And why did they choose it? Was it like was there intention behind it, or was it just, oh, I can do it because I want to do it? And from what you're describing, it's felt like it was more the author just saying, "Oh, I'm gonna trick the audience and kind of deliver that way," but there's no emotional stakes involved, no dramatic stakes or anything. So,
Yeah, I mean, the scene was dramatic. Like, anybody could have died in the specific scene, but for us to, like, literally, the whole premise was driven, like I said, by sort of familial ties with the main character. That was a big portion of the premise. And so just felt like, you know, any writer can write what they want. I don't think that was done very well, and I felt like a book that could have been saved or better or taken in a different direction. I think they kind of he took his foundation out from under him, and then there was some other stuff at the end where he tried to cram in a love story that was just like definitely forced. And I don't envy some of these major authors who have these timelines. They have to get things to the editors at certain things, and we talked about that with um, with the Game of Thrones, like that kind of pressure. I wouldn't necessarily thrive under it, but at the same time, they're also professionals and they do have a job to do. And like the author made this choice. It went to however many editors. It finally hits the cutting room floor, and this is what they came up with. Again, people can write what they want. I think that this was done kind of poorly.
um, and for me, the thing that always drives me crazy, and I one thing we never really kind of talked about it at the very start to preface this whole thing was that this is our personal pet peeves, right? Like
Right.
a lot of people will love the thing that we may not like,
Mhm.
right? And that's totally cool. It's just opening up the discussion about it and everything. For me, I always struggle when somebody puts um, description ahead of story.
Okay.
um, when they get carried away, I love language. I have no problem with a well-written sentence, everything like that. But if you cannot track what the story is, you don't know what the characters want, you don't know what the stakes are involved or anything like that. I do really struggle with it. But as I say this, like there are certain beautiful books that I love, like Michael Adonche writes these kind of weird twisting novels that you really don't know. I feel like he almost like pieces it together on on the way, right? Um, and I love it, but then sometimes I'm always like, why do we need this part, and where is it coming from? And then the worry I always get is when it feels more like it's supposed to be genre fiction, and you can't get the thread of the story, and you feel like they've just taken a diversion to look at this one thing or do this one thing or follow this one thing. And I do this to my students, I'm all the time, where I'm like, guys, like, what is the reason for this? Give me a reason for why that scene is there. And if there is not a reason, cut it. And it's kind of ruthless, but that's the way I always feel. And I do it to my writing partner all the time. I'm like, Ange, why is this here? Let's get rid of it. So,
well, and I think someone with your background of script writing, and you write action, you write like you're moving along, the characters and the plot are basically one and the same, driving things forward.
This series is, yes.
Right. And so from that perspective, yeah, when you have, flowing prose that don't quite fit. I actually did an opening chapter scene in one of my books where there is flowing prose, and it's coming from a character that actually isn't very descriptive. But if people who know my series, you're actually not seeing it from that character's perspective. You're actually seeing it from a different character's perspective through that person's eyes. And so they're the ones that are describing it. But I got a review where someone dinged me and said, that person doesn't describe things that way. But the point of it was to hammer home that you're actually seeing things through somebody else's eyes. And it's this character. And so that sounds a little disjointed for people who aren't familiar with my series.
Which book is this that it was on?
So that was in book 1.
Okay.
There was a scene in the park, and I went through this like long, like descriptive thing that I didn't do in the rest of the book, but the whole point of it was to partly to set the scene, but mostly to hammer home that and draw that blur between whose perspective is this, and some readers pick up on it and some don't. I think that's the other side of story decisions that ruin books for some readers, whereas for others they pick up on some of the nuance. I think it's almost like you have to do enough as a writer in the beginning to make the description of why did you spend a whole page describing a fancy doorknob or something like that? Like you spent like doilies on the wall. Like, why did you spend all this descriptor and then do nothing with it? But maybe if, you get in a flow where you're giving away clues to a scene, if it's like a detective scene and they have to give descriptions, things like that, or if it's
absolutely,
and things like that. But when you're not in on it, when you're not part of the inside joke as a reader, and you don't give them enough that they know what you're doing in a certain scene, then I think that's where it can drop it. Of course, it's always up to the reader to be engaged. It's always up to the reader to pick up on a lot of that stuff. But I feel like with writing, and we almost have to. You want to be subtle, but if you're too subtle, you're going to have these situations where you come to story arcs or story decisions, and you're going to lose some people.
And I think this is also one of those things that we're kind of bumping up against, which is that there's how much do you as an author want to make your reader work in the writing, right? For me, I always try and kind of be a good host, is the way I always describe it, where it's like, I want to make sure that people have a good time and move through the story well and everything like that. But like, I also really love stories that I do have to go back and figure it out and give a bit more extra effort into and stuff like that. But also coming back to the thing you were talking about is, and we talked about this before the show started, which was that there is the other choice that has to happen in your head as a writer is how does your character, whoever is your narrator, perceive this world, right? There, you may decide to make a choice that you may not necessarily. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this the best way.
You can give the example that you mentioned
Well,
earlier.
okay, so I happened to read. I was going through Reddit and I came across men describing women,
Mm-hmm.
Reddit feed, and as I was going through it, a part of me wondered, is it the male writer describing a woman in a scene, because it's usually sexist language, more about physical attributes and stuff like that. And as far as I can tell, I was trying to think about this in my own series with my writing partner, who happens to be a female. I don't think we go down those paths. Um, and it's personally, because I also don't really want to do that, but um, uh, I'm sure it's showing up. Anyway, so my question is always is like, for example, our boys, our teenage boys, so they very well may notice certain attributes of the people around them that may not be uh, what I want to write into the book. So
Yeah.
do I write that into the book or do I not? And so then when I look at when I was looking at men writing women, I'm wondering, is it the author's point of view, or is it the character's point of view that are being called out? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think with writers, and we talked about this before, how much of it is the writer putting themselves into the character? How much of it is the writer trying to appease the common reader, what they perceive to be the common reader, and they're sort of they're making the man fill a stereotype so he can use stereotypes as a filter to see women in the story.
Yeah.
Basically, like, and I think the criticism a lot of times is the it's that men are doing it, it's the male point of view, the male writer point of view, just coming through the character, like, and it's
Yes.
not true to the character. Like, the character has been this deep thinker the whole time, and then suddenly they see a woman and like they have these visceral, like, almost dirty thoughts that don't necessarily fit the story. um and why and how does that come across? And I actually, in my second, so I stay away from describing women physically if it's not part of the story, if it's not driving the characters in the story forward. um, and I've done that all the way until book two, near the end, where I introduce a new antagonist, and I needed a completely different antagonist. And this like drop dead gorgeous, as some might describe her, woman, who uses her looks as a way to manipulate a certain character. And she's in control the whole time. She's the one driving the whole scene, and she knows she's doing it. She admits she's doing it. And I do it to really differentiate from the rest of the antagonists that are in the book. And she also plays a key role in moving some things forward from behind the scenes, that will actually go in later books. Um, but I think the problem is, if it's poorly done, you're reducing characters to physical traits, and there's nothing behind it other than, oh, I'm just looking at this person, and I'm gonna just, they literally become the adjectives. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I could see readers getting to having a very good book, and then they get to this part where this male is describing a female, the narrator is a male describing a female character, and butchering it, and that could leave a bad taste in someone's mouth for either the rest of the book or whatever.
Well, and uh, I had brought up the example as well that in our book, in our first book, there's a point of view from the serial killer, and he describes one of his victims' butts. And I was like, and it was not my writing, it was my writing partner. And then I was like, oh, well, I don't really like it there, but maybe that's who he is. And so as we were building the character and everything in the writing, I'm like, okay, let's keep it in there for now. And it ended up in the final book. The other thing, though, and I always think this is one of my advantages, is that, my writing partner is female, my editor is female, and I love that. Like, I like kind of having that other perspective, and I've always loved having other perspectives, putting in their feedback to the writing and their points of view and everything like that. So, yeah, it's weird. And my Ange and I have talked about that a lot, where it's like, is the thing that we're putting in what we want it to be and everything like that. So that we totally like veered off of just talking about descriptions.
Well, but I think, again,
it's still about descriptions, but yes.
What can ruin a good book? I think we talked, about jumping the shark. And for people that don't know, that phrase is used from an episode of Happy Days where the Fonz, I forget the whole premise of that episode.
I don't even know if it was a bet or what it was.
But yeah, but at a certain point, he's jet skiing, and he ends up literally jumping over a shark in the water. And so that phrase has lived on forever as a critique of things that happen.
When the series was also getting rather, it had worn out its welcome, because it was like season 7 or 8 or something like that. Like, it was deep
and
into the series.
Right. And even if the show wasn't outstanding, that might have been sort of the nail in the coffin, as people say. You can't come back from jumping the shark, like the story choice you made. I will actually, there was actually a scene in Angels and Demons that was almost that for me. I don't know, for people who
reading of the book, or
the actual book. Yeah. And there's a scene, and I won't spoil too much, but I bring this one up specifically because it's older and people have had a chance. But there's a scene where he's in a helicopter, and he has the main character, Robert Langdon, has to jump out to survive, and he has like a plastic tarp, and he like glides down from like, I don't know, hundreds of feet in the air and lands in a river, and then he's like in a chase scene like 2 chapters later. Like, that book was so cool, except for that. Like, just like, really? Come on now. There had to be something else you could have done other than that. So I bring that up, and it didn't actually ruin. That's actually still my favorite Dan Brown book. Not that any of them are super, like, he's got this formula, he sticks to it, and he's really good at it. And so if he's your thing, you would like that. But yeah, that first one was very captivating. The pacing and all that was great. It was just that one scene where I'm like, all right, come on now. So I think doing things like that, you run the risk of alienating, and you build a certain clout or a certain amount of credit with the reader. He had built enough by the time I got to that scene that I'm like, all right, no, this is fine. I can move on from this. Let me see what happens next.
It's ridiculous, but I'm going to ignore it.
Right. Whereas, like, and I'll go back to the end of my first book was very anticlimactic when I gave it to my editor. The very first ending I ever wrote, because I didn't know how to end the book. Like, I was just like, okay, I know this thing needs to happen, so I'm just going to kind of make it happen. And there was a very slow lead up, and then all the climax resolved itself and all this stuff very slowly, and there was some deus ex machina that was just things that are just happening just to make the story finish. And my editor sent the book back to me. She's like, hey, this is a really cool story. Hey, that ending sucks. Like, she was just totally bluntly honest with me. And I was very appreciative, and I've said this, I think, probably in other episodes, but I rewrote, like, with her guidance, like, really, she only said, hey, make it more exciting. That was
Make it
pretty
not
much
suck.
exactly. Take the suck out and put in the good stuff. And so it took me 4 days, actually. It had taken me probably a month to write this bad ending, but with her sort of challenge, I was able to, and it was like, I don't know. I had to take out the whole end, and then I had to take out all the foreshadowing and everything. I had to change some scenes and some scenery. I had to like literally make new scenery in the book to fit the ending, and it worked out. It actually made the book that much better because I was building and building and building, and the original ending just let everybody down. The way she challenged me and the way I ended up finishing it, I was able to actually wrap it up like more like an action flick, more true to what I had been building towards. And so, I think writing those kinds of bad things in the drafting phase, perfectly acceptable. That's what the drafting phase is
Yeah.
for. And putting things in there that decisions you want to make, decisions you think need to be made, but then getting them in front of editors, beta readers, other people, so they can stop you and they can say, "Hey, that one scene that you jumped the shark with that one scene, and we need to figure that out. Otherwise, the book is good." Something like that.
I do think that there's always the other one that always worries me, and I'm not going to bring up the writer or the series or anything, but it was a series of books, main characters. There was two main characters, and the last one, there was just something tonally that immediately you could tell that the writer's heart wasn't into it. It was more for the paycheck.
Okay.
And all the pieces were there, but there was something that just felt kind of empty. It didn't have that passion or whatever it was. Um, and I almost feel, as I think of it now, that there was some like there was too many choices that were made where you would have felt like they would have said, "No, I'm not going to do this choice because it's off of what I'm kind of is the heart of the story." Whereas this time they were just like, maybe they were rushed, they were doing it. I'm pretty sure it was just for the paycheck, right? It ended up becoming a movie, and so I feel like it was okay. We're gonna do this for the movie. Um, the plan was probably to write the script as soon as they got the first draft, so then they had to get it out, sort of thing, and yeah, it just felt rushed. And also, there was a YA series that my wife and daughter read, which also got made into a movie series, and they both said that the final book of the series, it was a trilogy, and the third book was just, it felt rushed and kind of empty, and they just kind of threw the ending out, and that was it. And it's interesting because the movie, like the series didn't even finish as a movie series because there was such a lack of interest in the movie series, and I wonder if that was related to that as well. So I've
Yeah.
given enough hints that I think people can figure it out. But
Okay. I haven't figured it out, so that
okay.
maybe other people would have. But no, I think especially if you are if you're not on those kind of timelines, if you're not under those kind of conditions, if you're independent, if you're with a small publisher or something like that, and your timelines are your timelines, I think ironing out some of those story decisions are very important because I think you can paint yourself into a corner, and it might make sense to you to pivot out of that corner. Just, oh, okay, painting myself in a corner, let me just get myself out of it. But it might not resonate with a reader. It might not, and I feel like that's where we get to with, like we were saying, some of these bigger books is that they are on timelines. They do have these obligations, and it's not as much that's working under pressure. That's not a true how much talent does this author actually have? What would this story be if they would have had another 3 months or another 6 months or something like that? And I think, like I said, as an independent author, taking the time to figure those kinds of things out, to iron out those issues. And we're not always going to get it right. I think any author, any writers, we're not always going to get it right. We're going to make mistakes. But I think there's the other side of it is there's this persona that writers are infallible, that you can't criticize any writing, that like, oh, anybody can write anything, and it's all this like fun and all this stuff. And it's like, I think that if you're going to write and you're going to put it out there, that you should be ready for the criticism. You should be ready for people to interpret what you have written however they see fit. You might disagree with it. They might have not given it the best read. It might have been a cursory read and they just picked up on something, some things here or there. But I think whatever you write, you're responsible for it. If you put it out there and you're actively trying to, push the writing, push your books, things like that, you just have to be responsible for it. And so if you made mistakes, I would find it refreshing for authors to own up to that. Yep, nope, you're right. I made that story decision, still haunts me to this day, or I've come to terms with that story decision, even though it's not, I could have maybe done better there, but I'm, moving on. I can't go back now. That is what it is. So
cool. I think that's an awesome place to end this, right?
Absolutely.
Great job, DC.
You too, David, as always. And so if people like the content that we've been putting out, we do appreciate thumbs up on our episodes, subscribing, and we've said a bunch of maybe controversial stuff in this episode, so please. Well, we're criticizing writers, writing process in some case, and some people might, like I said, some people hold writers at the highest. They
should attack us.
They can do no wrong.
We like controversy,
right? Unless it's an indie author who's poorly edited, then attack the hell out of them. I guess
what?
That's the thing. Isn't that what people do on Twitter all the time? Anyway. I wanted to add controversy at the end of this so people have something to comment about. So comment down below. Unsubscribe if you don't like what we're doing.
What are we doing here? DC's like, hey, let's finish this up. Pours gasoline all over it, throws a match on.
Why not? Again, this is a meta experience for this whole episode. That's what I wanted to do.
Oh, okay, yeah.
See?
When you should have died right now. It'd be like, and then I just sit there. Oh, well, I guess I got to figure out how to end this show now.
And with that, any self-promotions this week or other promotions?
You know what? No, I'm not going to self-promote anything.
And I'm only going to shamelessly promote that we are allowing ads on Writers Row. And so if you would like to get an ad on Writers Row, my cat is very excited about having ads on Writers Row.
Yeah.
So reach out. There'll be an email in the description, and and we will be happy to look into
the cat
having advertisements of your book on this show. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.